Now let's go over the requirements for estimating a confidence interval for a population proportion. So first we'll start with our notation. Whoops. And with regard to notation, recall that we have our P, which is the population proportion, we have P hat, which is our sample proportion, N is our sample size, E is our margin of error, over here Z alpha over 2 is our critical value, and Q hat is calculated by taking 1 minus the P hat. Okay, now that we've looked at our notation once again and reviewed that, let's look at the requirements then for our confidence interval estimate of the proportion. First, the sample has to be a simple random sample. That goes way back, but recall we talked about requiring a simple random sample for all the different procedures we were going to be doing in this course. The conditions for the binomial distribution are satisfied, and let's recall those four. Fixed number of trials, independent trials, outcomes in 2 categories, and the probability of success is constant for all trials. And the third requirement is that there are at least 5 successes and 5 failures. So we can check that once we have our P hat. So we would say if N times P hat, that has to be greater than or equal to 5, because this is the proportion of success times the number in your sample. That'll give you the number of successes, and then N times Q hat will give you the number of failures, and that has to be greater than or equal to 5. So once we have these requirements met, we can calculate our confidence interval. Okay, and we will calculate E. Recall the formula for E. We will have our critical value based on the confidence level we're given in the problem times the square root of P hat, results from the study, our sample proportion, Q hat, 1 minus P hat, over N. This is all under the square root sign. So we'll calculate our margin of error, and then we'll calculate our confidence interval. The lower confidence limit is P hat minus the margin of error. We're estimating our proportion P, so this will stay, the variable P is in here. We're estimating the population proportion, so it stays there, P hat plus our margin of error. Okay, another way to show this confidence interval, this is one way, probably the most standard. You can also write it as P hat plus or minus E. You often hear that. Such as for our example we've been working on, our proportion was 0.72, or 72% of the Americans age 16 and older, 0.72 plus or minus some amount of error. Or we can also write it as an interval in interval notation. Here's an interval. Lowest value is p hat, or the low end, p hat minus e, comma, to your highest value, p hat plus e. So these are just 3 different ways to report a confidence interval, or 3 different ways you can be given a confidence interval in a problem if they and sometimes you'll be given a confidence interval and asked to calculate p hat and e. So this is these are the steps that we'll go through, and then we'll need a round-off rule. We round confidence interval limits to 3 decimal places. Unless you're otherwise instructed, that's the standard.